Welcome, everybody. I am Alex Fairfax-Chumley. I am your branch communications officer, for those who don't know yet. So I am chairing the first part. Well, I'm co-chairing with Barry Cooper, and then Michael Flexer is going to chair the open Q&A at the end. Both myself and Barry are probably going to have to make a run for it before the end of the meeting for different reasons. So that's who's running the show. Welcome to you, members. Thank you for coming. If you voted already, well done. Thank you. Don't forget to record the fact that you have voted by emailing president.eucu@exeter.ac.uk. That helps with our Get the Vote Out targeting. If you haven't voted yet, great to have you with us. Hopefully you'll find this meeting really useful. When you do vote, again, please record that you have voted with us as a branch. We are not interested in how you voted, just the fact that you have voted. It will just help us with our final week's targeting of getting the vote out. We are very pleased as a branch to have our General Secretary, Dr. Jo Grady, joining us today. So welcome, Jo. Jo has been in post since 2019. She has since then been fighting very visibly and forcefully for UCU members' rights and also for the higher education sector in general. It needs a lot of love and care at the moment, so your efforts are much appreciated, Jo. Yesterday, Jo was fighting for UCU members in Parliament for the Higher Education Committee. Some of you may have seen some clips on that already today. I would say you will undoubtedly have a warmer welcome here. But I will also say that I want to stress to people here that this is not intended as some kind of fluffy PR move. That is not Jo's intention either. This is a forum for tough questions if you have them, both for Jo and also for the branch committee. And if you need more information, if you're not keen on stuff, then please do ask, and you have the opportunity to do so in the final section of the session. So that is all I wanted to say, really. So without more ado, I will hand over to Jo. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alex. And if you haven't seen the clip because you're not on social media, I would actually really recommend nipping over to the UCU Twitter page, and it'll be probably quite close to the top, because I think the exchange that I had with the Education Select Committee yesterday in some ways really underlines why the union is balloting over these issues. Just to sort of give you a bit of context, the line of questioning from the particular MP was why won't higher education staff pull together in the way that others have pulled together during this pandemic? The implicit assumption being that nobody has been working themselves to the bone, and that nobody has been going above and beyond, not just in the last 10 years, but in the last 18 months. It was quite a disgraceful exchange with somebody so detached from the sector, but yet sitting on the Education Select Committee. So I would recommend going and looking at it, because I think it underlines just how bad working conditions in this sector have got over the last 10 years. How completely blind but ignorant, and willfully so, government is to that. That employers have been prioritising tuition fee, prioritising research income over the needs of staff and students. We see that everywhere on our campuses, that they're spending less and less of their money on us as staff. They're hoarding it instead in massive financial reserves, or on other things that they imagine will give them advantage over their competitors, such as extravagant, often vanity building projects, expensive advertising, and in some cases, advice from management consultants, and in some particularly egregious cases, advice from management consultants in order to construct redundancy cases against UCU members. And I know none of this will come as no surprise to people, but I think it's really important to underline it, because what I have been saying, I've been meeting with lots of branches, speaking to many, many members over the past 2 weeks, 3 weeks now. If we do not take collective action, our employers will keep making things worse, not just for us, but for our colleagues. And that essentially is really what this dispute is about. And that is just as true of the USS dispute as it is the forfeits dispute. So all I want to do in the time that I've got is talk about both disputes. I'm going to say a few things about the forfeits, the pay and pay related disputes, and then I'm going to talk about USS after that, make some concluding remarks, and then I'll be handing back to the committee to follow the rest of the agenda and some Q&A. The forfeits dispute, as you will no doubt be aware, has 4 issues. Each of those issues are broken down into a further set of demands, which we have made to our employers. If you want more details on them, there have been loads of infographics that have been sent out via email. I'm sure your branch can pop them in the chat, or they can be shared with you via some other means. But at base, the 4 issues are pay, casualisation, workload, and equality. On pay, we have had a decade of wage suppression, real term pay cuts of at least 17.6% since 2009, and that's relative to inflation. In the last 2 rounds of negotiations, our employers froze our pay, and then this year they only offered us 1.5% at a time when inflation is far higher than that and is forecast to keep going up. Now, I know for some people, because obviously I've been doing a lot of these meetings and speaking to a lot of people, the pay is something that they, depending on what grade they're on, how long they've been in the sector, what their personal circumstances are, the pay element, I think, is sometimes the issue that people can struggle with. You know, can I stand on a picket line and be explaining to nurses or to other kind of, essential and key workers why we're asking for a pay increase? And I think one of the things we need to really understand about this pay dispute is we in the UK, in UCU, in higher education, we have collective bargaining on pay. This means that wages are standardised across the sector for similar types of work. Most other unions in other sectors, they lost this decades ago. We think that if we are not willing to take strong industrial action on this, that we could lose it too. Our employers have recently been talking very publicly about a potential move to local bargaining. That is where each institution would set its own terms with its own employees. And I don't think you need me to point out that if they do that, not only will that thread that keeps everybody being uplifted together on the pay spine, from our estate staff and cleaning staff, professional service staff, all the way through to, professorial staff, not only would that be lost, but universities will be constantly competing to drive down wages further and undercut each other. We are at a really crucial moment to show employers that we are willing to take collective action and win UK-wide agreements on pay. At the same time, we want to keep those common sector-wide standards on pay. We have also been saying as a union, we need them extending. We need them extending to cover those other 3 issues: casualisation, workload, and equality. Anyone who has worked in this sector for even a short amount of time know that those are the huge underlying problems of our sector. The pandemic brought them into even sharper relief, but we know they've been there for a long time. And I think casualisation, just to start with that one, tens of thousands of staff in our institutions are on some form of fixed term or insecure contract. 75,000 is what we estimate. They deserve permanent ones. The percentage of these contracts that are fixed term, they've barely changed in the last 3 years. There really hasn't been much, if any, positive movement. And to go back to the pandemic, we saw thousands of these contracts not renewed or put at risk. UCU had to battle with the government to ensure that furloughed staff in HE who were casualised staff in HE could be furloughed. Casualised staff were saying to us as a union that they were disproportionately feeling pressured to accept in-person work and put their health at risk just to keep themselves in employment. Workload. I'm sure I don't need to tell anyone in this meeting about workload. I'm sure nobody came back from the summer feeling refreshed and rejuvenated and ready to leap back into the academic year. Workload was already extremely serious in terms of issues surrounding it. A survey we conducted during the pandemic in December showed it had gotten even worse. 78% of respondents said their workload had increased during the pandemic. We all know how much our senior managers and our vice chancellors like to take the new normal that they have imposed upon us as the standard with which they'll demand going forward. And again, this dispute is about saying no and pushing back and demanding some standards from that collective bargaining national level. And then finally, we still have quite significant pay gaps in higher education. The pay gap between Black and white staff is 17%. The disability pay gap is 9%. And the pay gap that we know more about, because employers have been publishing data about it for a few years now, is the gender pay gap. Mean across the sector, that is 15.1%. We know it goes up much higher at some institutions, and that will be 22 years for that to be closed. So I think the thing that I want to say in summary about Four Fights is workload and casualisation are bad for everyone. But what we know from the research that we have taken as a union is they affect some groups of staff even worse. Our workload survey found that women, that Black and disabled staff were all disproportionately likely to report that their workload had increased. The same groups are also disproportionately likely to be on a casualised rather than a permanent contract. So we're calling for action on all of these issues because they are interrelated. And I know that it might seem in some ways insurmountable, and our employers talk about these issues, and the MP who I had a few exchanges with yesterday talk about these issues as if they're somehow immovable facts of nature, but they're not. When I came into academia in my first full-time role in 2009, it was very different from when I left in 2019 when I got elected. The amount of casualised contracts, the amount of overwork, the amount of burnout, the more time I had to spend on what I would call, bullshit administrative tasks to keep the wheels of marketisation going, as opposed to actually spending it with my students. And I think that we have to remember as a union, we have won locally in individual institutions, actually, on all of these issues. And they came out of, in some instances, the 2018 USS dispute, and in some instances, the 2019 Four Fights dispute. So the Open University recently won an agreement to put 4,000 casually employed lecturers on permanent contracts. Bristol won a landmark agreement on gender pay, from professional service staff to professorial staff, and ensuring that career paths, upgrades and pay gaps were closed. The University of Hallam at Sheffield, they were able to win a landmark, for them in terms of a landmark deal on workload following their dispute in 2019. So yes, this is a national ballot that we're taking part in, but it's not a zero-sum game for you as a branch, and however you do in your local ballot can be used on any of those issues that are part of the national ballot around workload and the other things associated with Four Fights. So I just wanted to really underline that this isn't an unwinnable fight, that these aren't things that have to remain this way forever. So probably for the next 5 or 10 minutes or so, I'm just going to say something about USS, and then I'm going to hand back. Some of you may just be more up to date with USS because it is essentially a dispute that has been ongoing in some form since 2011. I've been reforming to what happens with US as a sort of triennial trauma, because around every valuation, there is an attempt by our employers to downgrade or cut our pensions. And it is fair to say that we find ourselves yet again at a really critical moment with USS. The pension scheme chose to conduct a valuation of its assets and liabilities, and it did this dated the 31st of March 2020, which, as you know, was the start of the pandemic. Quite literally a global economic shutdown in many senses, and the economy was crashing. On the basis of that valuation, USS claims that contributions need to increase massively or benefits need to be cut. And our employers, true to form, have chosen to cut our benefits. They forced through a package of massive cuts, and they've refused to pay a penny more than they currently do to protect our benefits. It's worth pointing out the scale of these cuts is even worse than the very similar proposal which employers made during our 2018 industrial action, which we rejected. The cuts amount to a reduction of about 35% in the guaranteed defined benefit part of your pension and a 20 to 25% cut overall. The cuts will hurt everyone, but because they are going to apply to the benefits you earn in the future and not to the past service, they will disproportionately hurt staff who are at the start of their careers or who haven't been in USS for very long. Now, I know that you'll probably be asking yourself, well, we're opposed to these cuts, of course. What have UCU been proposing as an alternative? And there's a short and a long-term answer to that. The short-term answer is our elected negotiators have already tried to make alternative proposals that would have been much better for members. The proposals that they took to the JNC, which is the Joint Negotiating Committee, which has UCU negotiators on, UUK, which is the employer body that represents for pensions. They have negotiators on there. Then there's an independent chair. And there's some people from USS sit on there, but they don't have voting rights. And our negotiators via that JNC put forward proposals that would have involved employers paying a little bit more, but not more than USS have already said they can afford. They would have involved staff paying less. In return for staff paying less, there would have been a slight reduction in benefits, but much less drastic than employers proposed. And most importantly, we proposed a series of completely new measures that would have made it much easier for low paid and precariously employed staff to join the scheme and get the same benefits from membership as everyone else, even if they ended up leaving the scheme or leaving the sector entirely. And I just want to talk about this for a minute or two because it's incredibly important, and it links in some ways to the Four Fights campaign. Currently, tens of thousands of eligible staff opt out of USS because the member contributions are too high. We know that's why they leave, because USS survey people when they leave, and people are repeatedly saying that. People are leaving USS because of high contributions at a rate that we do not see in any other comparable pension scheme. Now, when somebody leaves a defined benefit scheme, there are obvious negative consequences for them in that they don't get access to, the kind of Rolls Royce of pension schemes. So that is kind of problem number one for those people. But there's a double penalty, because what they also miss out from is contributions from their employer. So if you are in the scheme, you get 21.4% of your salary paid into your scheme by your employer. If you have to leave USS, there is no other way for you to get the money that is rightfully yours that they would have to pay in the scheme if you were still in it. So our proposals would have given those staff that currently are finding it unaffordable to remain in our pension scheme the ability to either pay half the normal member rate, or if circumstances were so stretched, pay nothing at all, but still get the full benefit of that 21.4% employer contribution. And obviously this would have had the benefit of keeping way more people in the scheme, which obviously has benefits for the scheme and not just those individuals, and therefore all of us. This was many of the things that our employers blocked. That was one of our short-term answers, and we tried to offer those proposals as a compromise. Employers back in August blocked them and forced a vote through on their proposals instead. We are not wedded to every word of those proposals. There is more time to negotiate. Anything we negotiate with employers needs to be voted on before, we would accept it by, voted on by you. But I just wanted to talk to you about that to give you a sense of what we were pushing for as a solution to the current valuation. It didn't have to be this way. We didn't have to have a ballot, but the employers essentially triggered this situation by cutting benefits by 35%. There also needs to be a long-term solution as well as a short-term one. We have to leave this dispute in a position to get something better at the next valuation as well as stopping this round of cuts. For that reason, we want employers to join us in calling for a new valuation as soon as possible. They were making very positive noises about this. They were speaking kind of as one with us on this until it got to the point where we saw their alternative proposals that were proposing cuts, and at one point even a defined contribution scheme for the lower paid. We also want to see implementations of other reforms around the scheme's governance and valuation methods that will produce better, fairer, more realistic outcomes in the future. So in terms of a win on USS, that's what it looks like. That's the answer. And anything we can call a win needs a long-term dimension as well as the short-term one. So before I wrap up, I just want to say a few more things about how we can win, not just you at Exeter, but nationally. So obviously it does involve you at Exeter as part of that national picture. In 2019, 2020, we got a very, very good set of ballot results. It was the first time as a union, particularly since the 2016 Trade Union Act came in, and since I was elected in 2019 and we started campaigning more around casualisation, it was the first serious mandate for action on forfeits that we've had. But it wasn't enough. And ultimately, industrial action is a numbers game. And we didn't have enough members to win the action. And if we are going to win this dispute, we don't just need members to vote. I mean, we do need that, but what we also need is to actively grow the union during this ballot and after it. We need more strength in numbers, and we particularly need to grow the union in areas where we don't currently have lots of numbers. Your committee will know what that means to you locally, but for example, nationally, we don't have as many members who are casualised as we should have. And when we need more members to take part in action if it does happen. Many of you will remember we ran a survey earlier this year on industrial action. We got around 17,000 responses from higher education members, which is huge. One of the messages that came through loud and clear was that people were more likely to take action if they had more colleagues who were very close to them and ideally in the same department taking action as well. Last time we had disputes like this, I did a big tour. I came to Exeter and I actually talked about casualisation, and I asked thousands of members to vote. And this time, I'm asking you to do more than that. I'm asking you that if your department doesn't currently have a rep, you need to volunteer. If it does have a rep, you need to approach them and ask them how you can help. I need you to talk to your colleagues, including those who aren't in our union. Repeat the message I gave you at the very beginning of this talk and really frame the hard choice the same way I did for you. Things have been getting worse for 10 years. Employers have given us nothing in negotiations. If you don't join the union, if you don't take action, the only thing we really know for certain is that things will keep getting worse. But what we also know, because we have seen it, is if we stick together, if we act together, we can win. Just like branches have won those agreements on casualisation, on equality and on workload that I mentioned, we have seen it across this pandemic. Institutions where UCU has stopped hundreds of compulsory redundancies despite being told they were unavoidable. We've done it, and we've done it again and again under the most difficult of circumstances. And now it is literally everybody's jobs, not just mine, but everybody's jobs in this meeting to come together and really do it on a national stage. So I will hand back to your chair so we can follow the rest of the agenda. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jo. That was really great. I've got my eye on the clock, so I'm going to follow the agenda, but I'm going to speed it up. But also because I think the pre-submitted questions that we had, you've kind of touched on them, or at least some of them already. I'm going to put them in the chat now, and I'm going to read them out by one by one. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to suggest, Jo, just to put you on the spot, if we could have hold on, if we could have a kind of a 30-second response, and then perhaps we can come back to it at the open Q&A session at the end. But I just wanted to cover these now before going on, just because we said
I'll do my best.
There are 5 questions here. So these were ones that were pre-submitted by members. So the first question is, what would you say to a professional services colleague and UCU member who feels that UCU is only concerned about working conditions for academic staff?
I would, first of all, I wouldn't want to invalidate that somebody feels that, because I think that the way in which the media talks a lot about our union, the academic staff is what captures a lot of attention. But it's not true. And actually, a lot of the work that we are doing around closing pay gaps, addressing opt-outs in USS, is very targeted at people who are not part of the academic workforce of HE, particularly in pre-92s, and it very much is focused at extending career paths for professional service staff and really trying to recruit. And I don't know what the mix-up of the Exeter committee is, but actually I would say some of our most ferocious reps on other committees are our professional service members. So I definitely think there is a representation issue and there's more we could do, but it really isn't the case at all. And I'm hoping that is coming through more and more with our outputs, but there is always improvements to be made. Okay,
thank you. Second question, can you clarify what progress UCU has actually made so far nationally in the fight against casualisation? So perhaps you have talked about, but maybe just give us one example of something we can go away and refer to.
Well, to be honest, though, I think this is part of the problem. We are doing very much better on local levels, and extracting local agreements. On a national level, our employees, so the letter that I got from UCU, which is the employers negotiating body that negotiates on behalf of all pay, they don't even want to talk about casualisation. They do not want to offer forward any commitments. They do not even want to offer forward ruling out the use of 0-hour contracts in HE. So have we made progress? Yes, we've extracted more sort of soft commitments from them than we ever have before. But the problem is that we can't just keep fighting this on a local level. And some of what we're asking for is really the bare minimum.
Okay, great, thank you. Question 3, why didn't UCU submit a counter proposal to anything? I think it's very clear that has.
Can I offer one clarification?
Yes.
Because I think the misinformation that is being put around by vice chancellors and UUK, it's one of those things where there's like a technical truth to it. They spiked our proposals at a time where, so our proposals were costed, they were discussed at numerous meetings, they feature on the agenda item of those meetings, but employers refused to underwrite them with covenant support that they were doing their own. So they were withdrawn from the meeting. So it is incorrect to say that they weren't there, but it is correct to say they weren't voted on because they were withdrawn because it was completely pointless.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I think that is as I understood it as well. So there is a technical element of truth, but it hides a lot. It hides a larger story.
And very misleading application of a technical truth.
Yeah, thank you. And then 5th, what format will this round of industrial action likely take? If it's more strikes, what assurances can you offer that these will be any more effective than previous efforts?
So I can't do this one in 30 seconds, but I will be as snappy as possible. So one of the things that we have put into this ballot result and then any notification of action is a branch delegates meeting. So normally what happens is the union announces its ballot results, and then the Higher Education Committee, the HEC, meets, and it is that committee who are elected every year by you as members that take decisions about what strike action will look like. Sometimes they take their mandate from something called HESC, which is a Higher Education Special Sector Conference, and they will be doing that. But the results come out on the 5th, which is nearly a week away, next Friday. And you as a branch have been asked at some point in the week following that to call your branch meeting. There will be questions that you will be asked as a branch to discuss and vote upon. And then you will be sending a branch delegate. It could be Alex that I'm talking to now. It could be someone else. I've no idea. And they will be going virtually to a meeting on Friday the 12th at UCU to represent the views of your branch. And that will be happening everywhere. So this isn't me or indeed anybody sort of wanting to make decisions on your behalf. And we really want, as part of this GTVO, you to be discussing what you want action to look like. And to go back to the question at the beginning about professional services, how we can actually target activities in a way that is meaningful. Because I am very aware that often, you know, action is very teaching focused. So it is very much in your hands as a branch and other branches to push that forward. So do keep attending your meetings, particularly after the ballot results, because regardless of how anybody does, every branch is invited to this branch delegate meeting to have their say about how we collectively address this. Sorry, I know that wasn't 30 seconds.
Thank you. And actually, Barry's pointed out to me that I've missed question 4, which is which I think we've kind of answered again, is what is the best answer to our university's official line that because USS are legally able to enforce their own worst reforms with the full backing of the pensions regulator, UUK's own proposals are the only way of preventing this?
That's not true. It's not true. So something that isn't very common knowledge, and it's really unfortunate, is so at the minute there is I can't remember the exact rate. I'm sorry, I should have made a note of this before I came to the meeting. At the moment, if UUK revoked their proposals, which is what we are saying is required if they want to negotiate in good faith, because they are saying that, so this is, I think, to go back to the question about our counter proposals, they know that we made them because they've said that they want to continue negotiating with us on the bits that they liked. If UUK were to revoke their cuts, we would be looking at, I have to be honest with everyone, a slightly increased contribution rate for this year. But that would be an interim measure to a 35% permanent cut to the guaranteed part of your pension. And we are saying that that would be far preferable, and especially if we had another valuation conducted, than us losing that part of our pension for forever. So this idea that somehow, you know, universities' hands are tied and we've got to do this in order to make the best of a bad situation is absolute rubbish. And it's also a situation of their making. So it's I find it really egregious because it's kind of holding us to ransom for their own bad decisions. So I hope that answers that question.
Yes, that. I'll take chair's privilege just because I think I understand it, but just to clarify for everyone, the idea is that if the UUK proposal is revoked, is taken away, the proposal as it stands for USS goes through till next April on an interim.
There's a schedule of contributions. Basically, without wanting to go into too much history, anyone who was around in 2018 will know that the JNC in February or late January voted through a downgrading from defined benefit to DC, defined contribution. As a result of our industrial action later that year, the JNC revoked the decision that UUK had forced through. Now, I'm not asking anyone to have any particular sympathies for USS, but USS were really annoyed about this because it meant that they had to come up with a new schedule of contributions, which they had thought were going to be something else because the scene was changing. So USS have learned from this, and they have created, sorry to use a Brexit phrase, but they've created a backstop of contribution increases that if the JNC revokes any of its decisions, become enacted. So these contribution rates, which I'm really sorry I can't remember and I'd have to go and dig them, would represent a small increase in the interim, but they would be an interim rather than the cuts. I hope that makes more sense.
Yes, no, that's perfect. Thank you for clarifying. I think that's very helpful.